Welcome back. You're watching News Center. Delegates and leaders from across the world arrive at Dubai for COP28, the annual conference on climate change. The UN Secretary General has called for phasing out fossil fuel within a reasonable time frame. UAE, the host of COP28, has been under scrutiny after reports emerged that the summit's Emirati president used his role at the negotiation to pursue fossil fuel deals. Joining us now to take this discussion forward is Sumant Sinha, Chairman and CEO of Renewable, and Sherry Madera, CEO at Carbon Disclosure Project. Thank you very much for joining us. Sumant Sinha, if I can begin with you, one of the things that the Indian government and many other nations would be outlining is adoption of targets for tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030. According to some think tanks, India would need $293 billion to achieve this. Where are we when it comes to tripling our renewable energy capacity, and where are the finances for this going to come from?
Well, Parikshit, first of all, I should tell you that the Indian government had actually a couple of years ago set a target to triple India's installed capacity by to get to 500 gigawatts of installed renewable capacity by 2030. So in some ways, India is already a little bit ahead of the curve. And, as with all of these things, it's not going to happen by itself. The first thing is you need the right infrastructure in place in terms of the grid. You need execution capacity on the ground. You need a supply chain. Then beyond that, you obviously need financing as well. And that financing will only come in if you have the appropriate return and the appropriate risk management situation. Now, all of that right now is in place in India reasonably well. And I think once that is the case, then you'll see that there is globally a lot of capital, right, between insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, public markets. So there is a lot of capital. I don't think capital is the issue. It's a question of, is there a right enabling environment? And is there the right kind of return that this capital can get? And I think both of those are there in India in good measure. And we also have momentum of having been on this trajectory for quite some time. So I don't think India is going to find it difficult to achieve the target. But honestly speaking, I think a lot of other countries in the rest of the world are going to struggle very hard because they just aren't as serious as India has been on trying to move forward on renewable energy. And their policies have been a little bit inconsistent over the years. And for example, the US is a clear case in point, depending on the administration, there is either support or there isn't support for renewables, for example, right? So I think a lot of other countries have to really buckle down and figure out how they're going to achieve this target. Because if countries don't individually achieve the target, then collectively, globally, we won't be able to achieve the tripling by 2030, which the G20 declaration has now adopted.
Right. Sherry, if I were to ask you, one of the things that the CDP has mentioned among its key asks at COP28 is high-quality disclosure as a critical tool for achieving net zero targets. Now, when it comes to disclosure requirements and meeting these requirements globally, where does the private sector really stand across the world, across geographies? Any comparison, any statistics that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me. Here as we're gearing up to COP, I think that this point about disclosure is really essential. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we're measuring and managing. And that's really the nub of this point. If we're talking about sort of what we're looking at towards COP, right now, this year is special because we're having the first global stock take. So what does that mean? It is the audit of understanding the NDCs that all of the countries have committed to. These are the targets that they've already committed to. However, the reality is that countries can only pull two direct levers. One is actually through their own system of what they're spending money and how it is that they're enacting their business of government. And the second one is policy making. So the reality that you're asking about is fundamental. You need to get the non-state actors disclosing so that we can calculate what is really happening across an economy. And CDP has been doing this for 23 years. We're very proud to be a not-for-profit global platform. And if we're talking about who is it that's disclosing, we have over 24,000 corporates that disclose. That represents over 66% of the global market cap. Who is it that's doing it? Our top disclosing nations are the US, followed by China, followed by Japan. However, we're seeing a huge uptake in disclosures from India. And part of this is to do with the pressures that they have on understanding what their emissions are. And it's actually a drive from their supply chain and their investors. And to pick up your previous point on how some of this is going to be financed, if you don't disclose, your access to capital is going to decrease. So I think that the first step in that journey has got to be more transparency from those that are looking at trying to fund their transition from fossil to clean.
Right. Sumant Sinha, there will be many industry veterans like you at COP28. What are certain cues that you would be looking at in terms of increasing your capex deployments over the next few years? Especially, let me ask you about operationalizing and capitalizing the loss and damage fund. How important would that be for you?
You know, Parikshit, we are already going at full tilt because, as I said earlier, India has already been on this path for some time. So we as a company are already at a point where we have 8.5 gigawatts of wind and solar farms deployed across the country. We have a pipeline of another close to 8 to 9 gigawatts of capacity that we have won in various auctions that we will be building out in the next 3 years. I don't think it's possible for us to frankly do more than that, because it'll already be adding maybe 3 gigawatts or thereabouts every year at this rate. And so I think, for us, the issue is really, can we make the execution ease a little bit better? And there really, of course, land acquisition is an important area. And I think that's a state subject. So that's an area where we can certainly do with some help. The loss and damage fund, Parikshit, to your other question, it doesn't really impact us because it's more of an adaptation fund, which is meant to come into place if countries face issues around climate change where they have certain natural disaster type events and so on, and they therefore require to offset the damages that they might sustain. So it's really meant for that kind of a situation. It's not really something that is applicable to us as people who are operating in the mitigation space,
right,
rather than the adaptation space.
Right. Sherry, COP28, as the CDP has said, must kickstart the global phase-out of all fossil fuels. And this must be high on the agenda at COP28. But considering that UAE itself is an oil-producing nation, one of the largest oil-producing nations, and the start of this COP has been very controversial as well, how much can we really achieve on that?
I think it's about addressing the issues, and frankly, it being hosted in the UAE can bring even more focus on the necessity to move away from fossil fuels. We're looking at sort of coal, we're talking about oil, we're talking about gas, and those have got to go down by 100%, 60%, and 70% respectively in order for us to achieve our 1.5-degree target as that is Paris aligned. And so I think that actually when we're talking about sort of how it is we do that, that is the real gem that could come out of COP28, which is how is it that we move the discussion into transition planning? And what does transition planning need? It needs a baseline. It needs that measurement, but it also needs a science-aligned, time-bound target. And if we look at that, then we're going to be able to assess on a much more rapid basis all of the elements of the economy in order to be able to see how that change away from fossil fuel is actually being actioned, and we can actually judge from that point of view. And I think that that is a really important thing for us to keep focused on, is that the targets and the timelines need to be science aligned, not electoral cycle aligned, and not driven by where we might be hosting COP. Frankly, it's a much bigger picture than that.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Sherry, Madera and Sumant Sinha on the program. Lots to expect at COP28 this time around. That's all we have time for on News Center. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.